Hello, everyone, and welcome to this webinar with the Center for Khmer Studies. My name is Magnus Fiskesjö. I am a professor at Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, in the US. And I'm also a member on the board of the CKS. And I'm here to moderate, so I'll say a few words of introduction. Including to CKS and also for our speaker and the event. And then I will hand over to our speaker. We're very happy to have Tiyas Bhattacharyya with us today. And then after she is finished speaking, everyone who is attending is welcome to raise questions by putting them into the Q&A. And after we have finished hearing the presentation, we can move to look at those questions and see what our speaker have to say about them. I would just briefly, before we move to the presentation, I would like to mention a few words about the Center for Khmer Studies, which has facilities in Phnom Penh and in Siem Reap in Cambodia. And it's a nonprofit institution for education, research, and for public service. And it welcomes everyone, especially people from Cambodia, and also foreigners, students, scholars, and the general public. There are events, cultural events, book fairs. There are also courses. There are fellowships and many opportunities that you can explore by going to the website khmerstudies.org, which explains everything about the Center for Khmer Studies and what is going on currently. I forgot to mention that our center has a publishing program. We also have a library, which is partially online, and that is also reachable by going to the website that I mentioned, khmerstudies.org. So you're very welcome to visit digitally or in person in Cambodia. Then for tonight's speaker, I'm so happy to welcome Ms. Tiyas Bhattacharyya, who is a Ph.D. candidate in the Department of Anthropology of the University of Oregon. And she has been doing research in Cambodia at the ancient site of Angkor Borei, which is before Angkor. And the research there has been part of the Lower Mekong Archaeological Project. And she has been looking at the remains of the animals that existed there. And her title is Fauna from Funan, a preliminary zooarchaeological analysis of animal remains from Angkor Borei, Cambodia. And once again, I am really happy to be able to introduce you as our speaker, and I'll turn it over to you now, and then close my window so that we can focus on your presentation. So the floor is yours, Tiyas.
Thank you so much for that lovely introduction, Dr. Fiskesjö. And hello, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. As noted, I will be discussing some of the preliminary results for my dissertation, and it has to do with animal remains from Angkor Borei. I want to start off by thanking and acknowledging these organizations and people without whom my research would not be possible. I want to take the time to specifically thank Center for Khmer Studies for hosting this webinar and having me, and for funding a portion of my research. And also, I would like to thank the Ministry of Culture and Fine Arts in Phnom Penh for allowing me to visit and work there last summer. And this is what I used the CK's funding for. And also specifically thanking the Lower Mekong Archaeological Project. Without everyone's hard work, I would not have the animal remains to examine. And of course, everyone else listed here played a huge role in providing me with support, advice, and help, and this presentation would not be possible without them. The funding I received from CKS allowed me the opportunity to travel to Cambodia last summer, so 2024, to work with some of my colleagues at the Ministry of Fine Art, or of Culture and Fine Arts in Phnom Penh, to conduct some data collection. And I also took part in informal workshops and presented some of my research while I was there as well. I'm very grateful to have received that opportunity and help. Moving forward with this presentation, this is an overview of what I will be talking about today. So I'll start off with a discussion of the background of Angkor Borei and give some information regarding the cultural phases. And this is the cultural phases are what I'll be using to sort through my data and look at changes over time. And then I'll delve into two of my main research topics and share some preliminary results and preliminary conclusions based off of that. And I'll end with a brief discussion of future plans of what further research I plan to do. My overall dissertation research focuses on the analysis of animal remains that were excavated from the site of Angkor Borei that was excavated by the Lower Mekong Archaeological Project, also known as LOMAP, led by co-directors Dr. Miriam Stark and His Excellency 𝐀𝐻𝐬𝐿. And Angkor Borei is located in the Mekong Delta region of southern Cambodia, which is where that arrow is pointing on the screen or on the map. Based on shifts in ceramic types and shifts in other archaeological materials, such as some radiocarbon and thermoluminescence dates, 3 cultural phases have been established at Angkor Borei, and these are the general phases that I will be using to examine the animal bones and teeth over time, with phase 3 being the oldest, which dates from about 500 BCE to 100 BCE. And then this is followed by phase 2, which dates to around 100 BCE to 200 CE. And then this is followed by phase 1, which dates to about 200, 300 CE to 500 CE. Angkor Borei is one of Southeast Asia's earliest urban centers, and the site covers 300 hectares, has a 4-meter brick wall that encloses the site, and moats are found inside and outside of this wall, and numerous canals are at this site that transform the landscape and also connect Angkor Borei to other settlements. Angkor Borei is also believed to be the capital of the polity known as Funan, that is described in documents written by visiting Chinese dignitaries, and this site was a major trading center. Within this period, it was involved in a series of interactions with India, and these interactions with India involved the exchange of material goods like metals, stone beads, glass beads, etc., and the adoption and adaptation of religious ideologies, artistic styles were also exchanged as well. There is evidence of occupation at Angkor Borei that spans this period of interaction. The animal remains I will be discussing were excavated by LOMAP and from these 3 units that I circled on the site map. So there's unit AB7, and this unit particularly had cemetery contexts found that dated from 200 BCE to 200 CE. And then units AB3 and AB4 are the 2 circled up here. And those contexts had evidence for residential and craft production use. To bring back the cultural phases, these are the same ones that I showed earlier. I'll be using this to examine, as I mentioned, the faunal assemblage over time, and more fine-tuned dating is needed to more closely examine trends. and I'm hoping to get radiocarbon dates eventually, but for now, this is what I'll be using. And before moving on, I want to emphasize that the cemetery contexts are within phase 2 primarily. And then all 3 phases are represented in all 3 units. A few things to go over too before I move forward, in case you don't have a zooarch background, is first, my research is based in zooarchaeological analysis, which means the focus is on studying animal bones and teeth to answer archaeological questions, just generally speaking. And then if I use the term fauna and faunal remains and assemblage, which I have already, fauna is generally referring to animals, and faunal remains and materials. When I say that, I'm referring to animal bones and teeth, and faunal assemblage is just a collection of these animal materials. Another term that I'll be using is NISP, which stands for Number of Identified Specimens, and this is a counting unit used in zooarchaeology to note the total number of specimens that can be identified, usually to the genus or species level. And the specimens here are referring to individual bones and teeth. So something to keep in mind regarding NISP is that the identified specimens that are counted using this unit are individual bones and teeth and not referring to the number of that specific animal necessarily, but just how many of the bones that are of a certain animal are there. All right, so for my dissertation research, I have 3 overarching research topics because I'm exploring human-animal relationships at Angkor Borei overall. And in order to do this, I aim to examine environmental and ecological shifts, overall the animal economy, and also ritual use of animals. For this presentation, I will go over some preliminary results relating to environmental ecological shifts and ritual use of animals. So moving forward, I'll give you more context regarding these 2 topics and how I have been investigating them and how I plan to continue onwards. However, I will not get to discuss overall animal economy today, but as I move forward with my research, I will be examining changes in the animal remains over time to investigate the use of animals within the greater economy for things like food, byproducts such as dairy, the bones for tools or jewelry, etc., and also labor for things like agriculture or carrying and moving goods over trade routes. So moving on to the first topic for my project, environmental and ecological shifts through the lens of the effects of land use intensification as seen through shifts in the faunal assemblage. I have been particularly investigating changes in the number of animals with specific habitat preferences over time and differences seen in each context. Just as a reminder, the contexts are units AB3, AB4, and AB7. I've been using NISP counts for this, and I'm noting changes in the amounts of bones and teeth of animals with these specific habitat preferences to investigate periods of land use intensification, which may be associated with the reduction of wetland forests. I've also been examining changes over time using the cultural phases that I showed you in a few of the previous slides to compare different contexts. I'll be comparing the NISP between the 3 contexts I listed before to see if there's differences in residential craft production spaces versus the unit with cemetery contexts. I've begun examining the trends based on a few of these taxa already, and that's what I'll show you in the next few slides. So the first animal that I'll discuss is the barking deer. The natural habitat tends to be rainforests and areas of dense vegetation. They also live close to water sources. So given they prefer rainforests and forested areas in general, their presence could indicate that the environment has wetland forests. So when looking at unit AB3, as you can see in phase 3, which was the earliest phase in the cultural phases slide I showed you, there's a NISP of 31 for barking deer, and then there's a 87.87% decrease to 2 in phase 2, and then there were none found in phase 1. And then in unit AB4, which is the other residential craft production unit, it's a bit different with there being no barking deer in phase 3. But then in phase 2, there's only 3 NISP, and there's a reduction of 1 NISP in phase 1. But when you look at unit AB7, there's a lot more. Different from the previous two, it shows that the lowest NISP of barking deer was in the earliest phase with 5 NISP. And then there's a 21.77% increase to 49 NISP in phase 2. And then there's another 23.59% increase to 95 NISP in phase 1. As land use is intensifying over time at this site, or as the site is urbanizing due to growing populations, rice agriculture centralizing, the natural habitats of these deer would be decreasing, and the assumption would be that there'd be less of these deer at this site, and perhaps that there would be a shift on relying on domestic animals as well. While this assumption seems to be supported in what we're seeing in units AB3 and AB4, this does not seem to be the case in unit AB7, which is interesting, and I'll get back to that. So another animal that I looked at as an indicator of the presence of wetland forests due to their preferred habitat being thick forests and swamp forests is the sambar deer. So when looking at unit AB3, you could see the earliest phase, phase 3, has 10 NISP, and the other phases have none. And then in unit AB4, similarly, there's a decrease over time, but there's 22 in phase 3, and there's a 33.33% decrease to 11 in phase 2, and then there were none found through excavation in phase 1. And then once again, in unit AB7, there's a different trend where there's only 1 in phase 3, but then there's a 26.39% increase to 20 in phase 2, and then there's a 43.06% increase from there to 51 NISP that was found in phase 1. Moving on, I also looked at indicators of land use intensification. One of them was rice field rats because they tend to live in cultivated areas such as rice paddies or grasslands, and they tend to be very dependent on human rice fields. Interestingly, there were no rice field rat remains found in units AB3 and AB4. However, there were many found in unit AB7. In the earlier phase 3, there were 13 NISP, and then there was a 24.72% increase to 102 NISP, and then there was a 39.72% increase to 245 in phase 1. And to explore another indicator of land use intensification that was also present in units AB3 and AB4, I also examined the data based off of what was there for rice field terrapin turtles. And their preferred habitat includes freshwater, inland waters, muddy rivers, creeks, swamps, and marshes. And they're also called rice field terrapin turtles because they're commonly found in rice paddy fields. So in unit AB3, it seems like in phase 3, there were 25 NISP, and then it didn't change in phase 2, but then there were none found in phase 1. However, in AB3, there was an increase over time, as would be expected if we're assuming that there was more rice field agriculture as time moved on. So there were 22 NISP in phase 3. There was a 17.65% increase to 43 in phase 2, and then a 9.24% increase to 54 NISP in phase 1. And then this trend continued and is similar in unit AB7. So phase 3 had 154 NISP, and there was an 18.57% increase to 579 NISP in phase 2. And then again, there was a 42.68% increase to 1,556 in phase 1. So to summarize the general trends from the data I just reviewed regarding environmental and ecological shifts over time, there's a general decrease in deer over time in units AB3 and AB4, which are the contexts with evidence for residential and craft production use. This may be due to general land use intensification that resulted in getting rid of preferred habitats of these deer. However, interestingly, as we saw, there was a general increase in these same deer in unit AB7 for both the barking deer and sambar deer. When looking at the rice field indicator animals, there was a drop in rice field terrapin turtles in phase 1 in unit AB3, but there was a gradual increase in these turtles throughout unit AB4, and there were no rice field rats in either of these contexts. This could indicate the use of these units may have shifted over time, while unit AB4 indicates rice agriculture being incorporated in the region over time. AB3's patterns may indicate that these units may have been used for different purposes at different periods, resulting in having different fauna found there. Overall, these units weren't as extensively excavated either as unit AB7, so that's something else to keep in mind. And in unit AB7, there was an increase in rice field rats and rice field terrapin turtles over time, which aligns with the assumption that there was an increase in land use intensification related to rice agriculture. So another overarching research topic I'm focusing on in my dissertation is the ritual use of animals. And one of these animals that I'll be focusing on are bovids, which are specifically the cattle and water buffalo that are found there. And other animals I'll focus on are suids, which are the pigs. And I'll bring in some interpretations based on the cervid or deer data that I showed you. When examining cattle and water buffalo, I was investigating changes in NISP over time. Since I have three different contexts with 2 distinct uses to look at, I'll also examine any differences once again between the residential craft production areas versus the unit with the cemetery context. So animals such as cattle, water buffalo, pigs, deer, they all have different roles in different societies. And within this context, I'm going to examine them through a ritual or social role. A visible distinction in which type of animal is heavily associated with burials, for example, could highlight the social significance given to these animals, differentiating them from the roles related to everyday use. On the other hand, if there is no clear distinction, or if there's some overlap, this could indicate that the ritual and everyday spheres are seen as intertwined. So first, as I mentioned, I will look at the NISP of cattle. I'll do a similar methodology where I'm looking at the changes in cattle NISP over time, and also for water buffalo, and have charts for different contexts. But before I do that, I want to go over why I'm choosing to focus on these animals. The importance of cattle in political and religious spheres within the later Angkorian period has been studied through the prevalence in inscriptions and bas-reliefs. And inscriptions from this period highlight the prominence of cows and their secondary products as gifts from kings to Brahmins and offerings to temples. Here are some examples of cattle imagery from the Angkorian period and in general that are associated with the spread of Indic religions and overall influence in Cambodia. So for the image on the top left is a picture of a bronze bull, Nandan, who is known as the Hindu god Shiva's mount. The bottom left shows a bas-relief depicting bullfighting. And the book cover in the middle is from a legend that follows 2 brothers. and the older one who is an ox, and the younger one is a man. This legend blends ideas associated with Indic religions, local culture, and also nationalism. And then the pictures on the top right and bottom right are images of Brahmins milking a cow and churning butter. And then the water buffalo also has importance in indigenous traditions, as seen through artifacts such as the bell at the bottom left with a water buffalo carved, and then the armbands in the middle of the slide. And then this emphasis on water buffalo can be seen as being continued even within Hindu contexts, as seen on the image on the right. The top right shows a full image of the goddess Durga, who is associated with slaying a water buffalo demon. And the image on the bottom right is a zoomed in picture of the pedestal the deity is standing on to show a carving of water buffalo. While this does have associations with Hinduism, this may also be representative of continued indigenous traditions after Indic influence as well. And then these are more symbolic buffalo jewelry shown in the top left and right. They are rings from burial contexts at the Iron Age site of Pumsnai. And then the bottom left shows an image of an epaulet with bull horns attached to it. And this was from a burial in Pumsnai too. So these Iron Age and Angkorian images highlight the dynamic relationship between people and cattle and water buffalo before and after incorporation of Indic imagery. This relationship goes beyond subsistence and even just secondary product use, and highlights that these animals had various social roles spanning from religious to nationalistic importance and even more. And as mentioned before, Angkor Borei is within a transitional period in terms of interacting with and incorporating elements of South Asian culture, art styles, religion, etc. Based on this, I want to examine the remains of cattle and water buffalo to see if there's a similar shift over time at Angkor Borei with an increase in cattle and decrease in water buffalo, perhaps, or if that doesn't occur. And in the following slides, that's what I'll take you through similarly with each showing you the bar graphs over time in each context. Okay, so when looking at unit AB7, phase 3, this is looking at the changes in cattle specifically. Phase 3 had 8 NISP, and there was a 30.38% increase to 87 NISP in phase 2, and then there was a 30% increase to 165 NISP in phase 1. And then in unit AB3, one of the residential craft production units, phase 3 had 22 NISP, and then there was a 46.67% decrease to 8 NISP, and then phase 1 had none. And then in unit AB4, phase 3 had 11 NISP, and there was a 33.33% increase to 23 NISP in phase 2. And then there was a 58.33% decrease to 2 NISP in phase 1. When examining the water buffalo remains in unit AB7, the trend is similar to what we saw with the cattle in AB7, where there is an overall increase over time with phase 3 having 0 and then 22 NISP in phase 2. And then there's a 42.86% increase to 55 NISP in phase 1. And when looking at the residential craft production units, AB3 did not have any water buffalo, and AB4 only had 2 NISP found in phase 2. When examining differences based on context, there's overall higher amounts of cattle and water buffalo found in unit AB7, which once again is the unit with the cemetery layers. And then unit AB3 and AB4 didn't have as much in comparison. When examining changes over time in Unit AB7, there is a significant increase in Phase 1, and Units AB3 and AB4 have more cattle remains in the earlier Phase 3. And water buffalo is also primarily found in cemetery contexts. So cattle and water buffalo seem to primarily be used within ritual contexts at this site. The primary use of these cattle and water buffalo could indicate conscious choice and care was given to these animals, perhaps, but they were consciously chosen to be buried in this particular context. This could indicate perhaps a shift in their ritual importance over time, and perhaps even a shift in centralization of ritual practices. And then, given that water buffalo were still present in later periods, this could indicate some kind of perseverance of indigenous rituals while also incorporating Indic influences. The next animal I'll examine within a ritual context is pig, and I'll use similar methods as I did for the cattle. So first, why pigs? One of the main reasons to examine pig remains further is because based on previous studies and a preliminary analysis conducted of possible domestic species found at Angkor Borei, pig remains had the highest NISP. As you can see on the table, there's 5,304 number of identified specimens of pigs specifically found at this site. This means 91.5% of the bones of possible domestic species excavated from units AB3, AB4, and AB7 are pig bone and teeth. Another reason to investigate the roles of pigs at Angkor Borei is, or another reason this is important, is because other than faunal assemblages at Angkor Borei mainly being composed of pigs overall, the pigs were mainly being found in cemetery contexts. As per previous studies, the most common possible grave goods found were pig skulls and mandibles, and alongside globular earthenwares. Pig head offerings can also be tied to at least 6 of 33 primary burials, and the dominance of pig remains in the assemblage insinuates its importance in not only subsistence practices, but a large amount of pig remains being in the cemetery context suggests they were also important in ritual activity as well. Also, pigs have been seen as being used as offerings in other Iron Age sites in Cambodia and also Thailand. And today, pig heads are also still used as offerings within Cambodian ritual practices. For example, they're found in ceremonies acknowledging and asking permissions from ancestor spirits before performing activities that involve breaking the ground within their territories, such as construction or even excavation. During my first year participating in an excavation in Battambang, Cambodia, I saw a pig head used as an offering during a similar blessing ceremony before we began to excavate, which involves breaking the ground. And this picture on the slide shows a woman setting up for a similar ceremony during the 2022 field season. And within the Cambodian diaspora, pig heads have also been used as offerings as part of ceremonies to honor living and deceased teachers. In these ceremonies, pig heads are sometimes used alongside other offerings. And while these ceremonies are not associated directly to burials, as we're seeing at Angkor Borei, they show the continuation of the ritual use of pigs. So bringing it back to Angkor Borei, when looking at the number of identified specimens for pigs at Unit AB3, Phase 3 had 21 NISP, and there was just one NISP difference in Phase 2, where there was 20 found, and then Phase 1 had none. And then in Unit AB4, Phase 3 had an NISP of 17, and there was a 30% increase to 38 NISP, and then there was a 32.86% decrease to 15 NISP. And then in Unit AB7, the NISP was 70 in the earliest phase, and then there was a 44.56% increase to 2,292 NISP in Phase 2. Once again, that's primarily where the cemetery context was. And then there was a slight increase, 6.66% increase to 2,624 NISP in phase 1. So when comparing the NISP between different contexts, there are more pig remains overall found within unit AB7, which is a unit with the cemetery layers. When examining changes over time, there seems to be an increase from phase 3 to phase 2 in units AB4 and AB7, with the NISP only changing slightly in unit AB3. The general increase in the other 2 units may be linked to the use of the cemetery layers, being in phase 2 specifically. And then the residential units then show a decrease in pig remains in phase 1. However, in unit AB7, there continues to be an increase. So while this work is ongoing, now that we've gone through all that data and the general trends on those 2 specific topics that I'll be focusing on for my dissertation, I'll summarize the main findings in the next few slides and take you through some of my preliminary interpretations and some questions I still have, things I'm thinking about based on the data. So when thinking about environmental and ecological shifts at Angkor Borei, a lot of the data I've looked at so far does align with the idea that as Angkor Borei urbanized, there was an increase in land use intensification over time. This is supported by the fact that there is a general decrease in NISP of barking deer and sambar deer in units AB3 and AB4. This indicates that there may have been a reduction of presence of their preferred habitat of wetland forested areas. This is also supported by the increase in NISP of both rice-field terrapin turtles and rice-field rats in unit AB7, which indicates that this land use intensification included the intensification of rice agriculture. And this increase in rice-field terrapin turtles is also seen in unit AB4. However, interestingly, there is some data that does go against what would be the natural assumption as we're thinking about increased land use intensification, and this includes the fact that there's a general increase in deer over time in unit AB7 for both the barking deer and the sambar deer. What I think is likely is this could also indicate there may have been possible ritual use or social importance of these deer, given unit AB7 is where the cemetery layers were in phase 2. So even if the deer were no longer living in this area, they could have been continued to be hunted for either ritual use, meat, byproducts, or for all those things. And then their remains were specifically chosen to be placed in unit AB7. This is something that I'm still thinking about, and I'm curious to see if there are other wild animals, specifically other deer perhaps, that follow a similar pattern in unit AB7. Some other data that doesn't seem to perfectly align with the idea of increased land use intensification is a decrease in rice-field terrapin turtles in unit AB3, and there being no rice-field terrapin or rice-field rats in unit AB3 and AB4. This could indicate the use of these units may have shifted over time, while unit AB4 has some indication of rice agriculture being incorporated in the region over time by showing some increase. Unit AB3's patterns may indicate that these units have been used for different purposes at different periods. Overall, these units, like I mentioned before, weren't as extensively excavated. This difference in pattern could also be influenced by the fact that units AB3 and AB4 have mainly evidence for residential use and craft production. So the use and purpose of these units are very different than unit AB7, since it seems that people are actively using AB3 and AB4, whether it was to live, go about daily activities, or different craft production. The intense usage of these units by people could make them not as desirable for turtles and rats to live in. Also, if people were living in these units, they could be cleaning the area more often, which would deter the rats specifically. And if the fact that there's very little amounts of rice-field terrapin turtles found in these units could indicate that they might also be accidental internments, but this is something that I would like to explore further. So moving on to ritual use, based on the cattle and water buffalo data, some preliminary conclusions I can make regarding ritual use of animals is that cattle and water buffalo seem to be primarily used in the unit that has ritual context versus within residential craft production spaces. This could indicate these specific animals are consciously chosen to play a role in mortuary context. Given the lack of cattle and water buffalo in Unit AB7 in Phase 1, with Units AB3 and AB4 having more cattle specifically in that, or in Phase 3, this could indicate there was a shift in associating these cattle and water buffalo with ritual or social importance in later periods. This shift could also indicate that ritual practice associated with burial may have become more centralized over time, and indigenous beliefs may have been expressed differently prior. This may have changed later on as well, given in Unit AB7, Phase 1 still has cattle and water buffalo remains, despite the cemetery context primarily being found in Phase 2. The presence of both water buffalo and cattle in Phase 1, which is the latest phase in Unit AB7, could also indicate while Indic influences may have affected the incorporation of cattle within ritual contexts, the indigenous beliefs and practices associated with water buffalo seem to have also persevered. And then for the pigs, based on this information that I went over and previous research that has already been done, with the burials at Angkor Borei, I can further support previous conclusions that pigs were primarily used within these ritual contexts, especially because their skulls and mandibles have been discussed as being offerings and possibly being tied to at least 6 specific burials. This could indicate these specific animals, once again, were consciously being chosen by the people to play a role within that mortuary context. Given there was an increase in all contexts during Phase 2, when the cemetery was primarily in use, this suggests that there was a shift in ritual importance and ritual practice from Phase 3 to Phase 2. The decrease of pig remains in Phase 1 in the units with residential and craft production context could indicate that even when the cemetery is no longer in use, ritual importance continued because we saw there was still an increase in Unit AB7. The focus of Unit AB7 having the majority of these pig remains alongside the presence of the cemetery may also suggest an increased centralization of ritual practice over time. So there's much more to do. So I'm going to briefly summarize some of the future directions that I am thinking about going in as I continue my research. So I plan to conduct further faunal analysis, including examining the other animals in these units and examining them using MNI counts, which is different than NISP. So MNI counts look at the minimum number of individuals. So while NISP is counting individual bones, teeth, or fragments of these, MNI aims to figure out the minimum number of each animal that may have been present in a specific context. And I also want to look at patterns and what elements are found in cemetery contexts versus other areas. Aside from, of course, as we know, pig heads and mandibles, I also want to examine element distribution in terms of what elements of deer or even cattle and water buffalo are being found in these cemetery contexts and elsewhere. I also aim to examine taphonomy, human effects on these bones, and investigate what's being found overall in cemetery contexts versus elsewhere. Something else I'm looking to do is conduct stable isotope analysis to compare diets of cattle and water buffalo in both residential and cemetery contexts to investigate whether animals used for ritual purpose had more specialized diet, which could indicate specialized care. I also want to do the same with the pig remains as well. And I also, by conducting stable isotope analysis, I also aim to compare diets of wild animals and possible domestic animals to see if there's different human management practices, especially in terms of diet that are being implemented over time, if this changes over time, or if it doesn't. And then also would like to send in samples for radiocarbon dates, as I mentioned earlier, to help analyze shifts over time more closely. As you saw in the cultural phases, each phase spans a few hundred years. So getting additional radiocarbon date samples would be super helpful to continue my analysis and fine-tune it. Thank you so much for coming to this talk. And if you're interested in my bibliography, that QR code should take you to a Google Doc for that. But if you have any issues accessing it, my email is on this slide. Feel free to email me as well. Thank you so much.
Thank you. That is fantastic. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
We have quite a few questions lined up, and I have a few in my mind, but we're going to go to the audience first. So why don't we jump into it? Actually, the first two, as you might be able to see, the first two are both about cattle and buffalo. So maybe you could address them together. The first one is from Mr. An in Phnom Penh, who asked, based on this zooarchaeological work, how big was the cattle and water buffalo size back at that time at Angkor Borei, compared with current cattle and buffalo size that we see in Cambodia? So that's one. And then the second question from 𝐀𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐭𝐫𝐚𝐜𝐭 also asked about cattle and buffalo and says, are the cattle and buffalo remains originated from wild species or domesticated stocks? Thanks.
All right. To answer first, how big the cattle and water buffalo are, comparatively, I am actually going to start analyzing the remains more specifically soon. So I haven't gotten to compare that yet, but from the brief look that I've gotten so far, it seems to be similar, but I can't give you a definitive answer just yet, but stay tuned. I will get you a better answer moving forward. And then similarly for the second question regarding if they were originated from wild or domestic stocks, they seem to be labeled so far as possible domestic. But once again, when I take a closer look at the cattle and water buffalo, I can better answer that question. But I do think that especially when there's an increase, that time where there seems to be an increase over time, they are probably leaning more towards domestic stocks, but there may be some wild. So I want to double check before fully answering. Thank you for those questions.
Thank you for those answers. And then the next one is also 𝐀𝐻𝐻𝐬𝐭𝐫𝐚𝐜𝐭 asking, apart from the rice field rats that you mentioned, are there any remains attributed to Rattus ratus?
Yes, I did see some of those in the assemblage data. I don't recall how many, but I did see that within.
Oh, your screen.
How much of them there are. Yes.
I see. Yes. And now we go to Courtney Work, who asks, would the cemetery area have been more wild, quote unquote? She says, we see today that cemetery areas are rich in biodiversity, and this could say something about the increase in deer remains in cemeteries.
Yeah, Courtney, I think that's a very good thing to think about, and it's something I definitely will be thinking about as I'm sitting with this data and also examining the other deer and wildlife. And that's another reason I want to continue to look at other wildlife and wild animals and do a similar examination of changes over time and based on context as well to see if they follow a similar pattern. That could be due to the area being more rich in biodiversity. That could be one of the reasons there are more, but I still need to sit with that data for a bit and look at the elements themselves to see if there, for example, if there are specific elements of deer that are being found there that could be attributed to it being more of a conscious choice of putting the deer there for something like ritual use, but that is definitely part of that future work as I'm writing the chapter on that ecological shift. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Why don't we pause the next one and jump to the one after, because it's also about cemeteries. So Tak Chalunterena asks, can you help us understand cemetery? Such as, are they for human burials? And the fact that they contain animal bones that are for consumption, ritual, or work animals. How large is the area of each of those sites? Are the phases you mentioned based on how deep down are the burial excavation, the excavation in these cemetery areas?
Yes, so cemetery is specifically in, let me see if I could go back to the cultural phases slide to better, or let me, but in the phases have been based on ceramics that have been found throughout, ceramic style shifts, and also some radiocarbon dates that have been, let me close this out and just, it might be faster if I find it here. Sorry, my slides have frozen. Okay. All right, so to answer your question about cemeteries and the phases are based on, like I mentioned earlier, ceramic style changes over time and also some dating that has been done, radiocarbon and thermoluminescence dating. So these are just general phases of occupation during this specific Iron Age period of this at Angkor Borei. So this isn't just allocated to the cemetery. But the cemetery contexts were found in Unit AB7, particularly in phase 2. They actually range from 200 BCE to 200 CE. So it's mainly in phase 2, but some of it seems to be in phase 3 as well. So when I say cemetery, these are human remains that were buried at this, or that were found at Unit AB7. And there were some animal bones found as most likely offerings, or it seems like offerings, especially when we're looking at the pig mandibles and skulls. And 6 of them were tied. There's been, in my bibliography, there's been previous research that focused specifically on the cemetery and the human burial context. So that would definitely give you a bit more information regarding that. But the pig mandibles and skulls seem to definitely be tied, and that's already known to be tied to the cemetery context as an offering. And size-wise, can't remember off the top of my head. I'm seeing if there's so if this is 500 meters, I would have to double check. I can't remember the exact size, but there were definitely, Unit AB7 was on a hill, I recall reading, and that a large area of that was excavated once they found human remains. The reason that we only know of 6 pig skulls and mandibles being tied to some of the burials is because the cemetery was very commingled and mixed, so it's kind of difficult to tie everything neatly to each burial. But I hope that answered part of your question at least, or the phases you mentioned. Yeah, okay. But yeah, if you would like further reading related to the cemetery context, please feel free to reach out to me and I will definitely share some more of that information with you. Thank you.
Thank you. So let's jump one back. 𝐀𝐻𝐿 writes, could you tell us more about how Indic cultural influences affected indigenous Khmer rituals during pre-Angkor and Angkor periods, based on your research findings? Is there evidence that Indic practices resonated with existing Khmer ritual practices and were therefore accepted by the Khmer?
That is a very good question. So what I went over regarding the cattle and water buffalo specifically is the main thing that I've noted regarding faunal influence of or how fauna may have connections to this over time. Main thing is there was a lot of the images that I used were from the Angkorian period, and there has been some work more recently, especially that examines the idea of there being water buffalo cults that seem to be more indigenous to the region. And and that's why I brought in the statue of Durga specifically with the water buffalo underneath, where we see that water buffalo is still prominent in some areas because it does have ties to the Indic religions as there's more Indic influence. But there has been speculation and thought related to perhaps thinking about it from a more indigenous lens, where while that's even after there's more Indic influence, there's still prominence of water buffalo that could have been influenced by the previous importance of it. But other than that, I'm still looking further into the Iron Age period, and because that's Iron Age and Proto-Historic period is when the site I'm focusing on, which is earlier than Pre-Angkor and Angkor periods. So I don't have too many specifics regarding those two periods in terms of Indic influence, but these are things that I'm thinking about within this site and how the animals that I'm looking at could be like help answer questions relating to how this influence in the earliest stages are seen, if that makes sense.
Thank you. Next, we go to a question about elephants. So Mr. An asked, were there any elephants and what was their role compared to cattle and buffalo during the Angkor Borei era? Can we say that cattle and buffalo were used for daily household activities, while elephants were used for ritual use or purposes and for military and heavy transportation use?
That is a very good question. I did not see any elephant in the assemblage that I'm looking at. That doesn't necessarily mean during that era that there was no use of elephants. But at the assemblage or with the assemblage that I'm looking at, there doesn't seem to be that much. And if there is, it's very minimal because I haven't come across it yet as I'm looking through the bones.
Maybe this is where I can squeeze in one of the questions I was thinking of, and then we continue with the audience questions. Because, at the later cities, Angkorian and Pre-Angkorian, there's usually what they call in English an elephant corral, which is still preserved in some places, including in Thailand, where the elephants are being kept. But in Cambodia, they're always called Krolromeas, which is the corral of the rhinoceroses. So my question was going to be, was there an elephant corral at Angkor Borei? Did they keep rhinos in it? Did you find any rhinos piled up in there?
That sounds very cool, but unfortunately I have not. But that's a good question for both of you. Sorry, I haven't found any elephants or rhinos yet. If there's anything that I notice, I will make sure to share.
But elephant was recorded at Angkor Borei, wasn't it? I think in one of your
Mm.
abstract or something, there was a note that there was elephant. Maybe
Um,
not in those areas that you were looking at results from, but
yeah, not in the areas that I'm looking at results from yet. And like I said, if there were, it's quite minimal, so it doesn't seem like there's piles of them,
okay.
unfortunately. Yeah.
Thank you, and sorry for squeezing in. Another question from Tak Chalam Tiarana here at Cornell. Um, he asked, did you also find domestic animals such as dogs, cats, chicken, etc.?
Yeah, so there's much more animals. Actually, in total, I think there's over 32,000 fragments or NISP in the whole site that have been identified. So there are much more animals that I haven't had the chance to look through the data for, but there's definitely chicken for sure. And canids, I don't know specifically if they're domestic dogs, but they're in that general family. And they're other than that, the main ones were cattle, water buffalo, pigs, and chicken was one of the other main ones, aside from fish, because there's also multiple fish that have already been examined in other studies. But yes, short answer to your question, there are other domestic animals.
I'm gonna jump ahead a little bit because there is a specific question about the chicken. So there's a question from Masaki Eda, uh, uh, a couple of questions down, which says, "Thank you for your great talk. I am interested in chicken. Could you kindly tell me when chickens were found in your site, how the number changed? I think chicken are also animals that prefer farmland."
Yes. So there are chicken. I have not looked at them, unfortunately, so I can't tell you specifics regarding the number change, but I definitely think that's something that I aim to do with that further faunal analysis part, where I'm going to look at and look through the data and put them in order similarly to what I did in this presentation. But unfortunately, I can't fully answer your question, but definitely feel free to keep in touch because I will get to the chicken.
Yes. So jumping back, Rebecca Hopkins has a question. She says, "Thank you for the great talk. Could you comment more on the ritual use of animal bones and what conditions they were found in, such as, is there any indications of feasting? Are the bones found as whole skeletons?"
Mhm. So, that's a great question. Thank you. For conditions, like I mentioned earlier, for the cemetery context, a lot of them are commingled. So there's a lot of mixing of these bones.
Mhm.
And because of that, it doesn't, or maybe because of that, but also perhaps due to choice of what elements they want to put in cemetery context or ritual context in general, it doesn't seem like there are whole skeletons, at least from looking at the pigs, for example, we for sure know it's mainly pig skull and mandible that's within those contexts. And I also, that's another reason I want to look at the what kinds of elements or what types of bones specifically from each animal are found in the cemetery context, which is one of my next steps to see if there are other animals that perhaps whole skeletons are present within cemetery contexts. But as far as I know, for the pigs at least, it's mainly crania. And then conditions that they're found in. For the pig skulls that I've looked at so far, I don't know, like there seems to be certain markings that could be attributed to butchering, but that could also be associated with the fact that they were cut off to be placed there. But I need to look further at these assemblages more specifically to see if there is evidence of feasting, which is something that I'm interested in looking further into, especially when I'm writing the chapter on ritual use. But that's mainly what I know so far. So stay tuned for that as well. Thank you.
Yeah, there's more questions coming up on cattle and buffalo, but the first one from anonymous attendee. asking any evidence of other types of animals, such as primates, carnivores, bats, etc.
Yeah, so there's a lot of other animals such as there's multiple fish, like I mentioned, carnivore wise. There's like there's two tiger teeth from what I remember, but that's not a huge part of the assemblage, but that's something that I recall being there. And there's also, like I mentioned, other possible canids. Don't know if they're domestic or not. And I did see some bats within the assemblage as well. It's quite a vast assemblage. So there's much more that I may have not yet gotten to yet, but there's also snails, um, freshwater snails specifically. And those are the ones I could think of off the top of my head, but there's many animals at this site.
Now, I think we do have to jump again
Mhm.
because there's a follow-up question on crabs. So Joshua Hoskin, he writes a couple of questions down. Apologies if you already answered this. My Wi-Fi is not brilliant. Were there remains of crustaceans, such as crabs, as might be found in present-day rice fields? Is there evidence that there was intentional cultivation of certain species alongside the crops?
Um, for the crabs, I don't recall seeing that in the assemblage. But regarding your last question, that's something that I am interested in looking further into, um, especially regarding, I believe they're called apple snails, because it seems like, at least in present day, there are areas where there's um, I don't know if you'd call it well, yeah, intentional cultivation of certain species that like help eat pests in rice paddies. And I'm interested, and I believe apple snails is one option in certain areas. So that's something I am interested in looking further into.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Going back up to anonymous attendee, asking again on the beef issue. Do you know if people during Angkorian period ate beef because of Hindu influence? And maybe you could address both Angkorian and pre-Angkorian,
Mm.
because
Uh,
Angkor Borei is before.
right, yeah, yes. I don't know the actual answer of it because zooarchaeological work has been um, not as extensive in the region due to preservation issues. But I would think that there's a chance that they did, because something to remember about Hindu influences and Indic influences is this could be something that's more so affecting and associated with royal lineages, perhaps. And we don't um, you'd also want to think about how there's a combination of various like local and indigenous religions that may have to be incorporated within like whatever transition is happening when there's more Indic influences. So I would think maybe, but I don't know the actual answer.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Related question from Sophie Miller. Thank you for a great talk. You said a possible interpretation for the increasing quantity of cattle, water buffalo, and pig remains in AB7 could relate to the importance of these often ritually potent animals. Do you have any preliminary ideas about why you are seeing the same pattern, distinctly increasing quantity with each phase for all of the wild animals too?
Mm, That's a good question. Um, I think perhaps this could be tied to uh, still having a ritual or a theory. So I don't know if this is the actual answer I have, is it could be tied to wild animals being seen as ritually potent, but in a different way as well, even as there's an intensification of rice agriculture over time. Um, I That's one idea I have. Um, don't have a solid answer for you, but that seems likely, where even if cattle, water buffalo, pig remains are ritually potent at this time, it seems like the deer and wild, and if I look at other wild animals and see similar patterns, it could indicate wildlife has a role within ritual and whatever religious uh, ideology they may have had.
Thank you. And anonymous attendee also asked a broad question. May you give more details on the relation of the bull and human in daily life and religious view? Um, how would you
Uh,
take on that? Expanding on what you have been saying, maybe?
um, I would need to do further analysis of the cattle bones specifically, but something that I'm interested in relation to looking at cattle or bull use in daily life, for instance, is examining if there's specific pathologies that are associated with that show up in certain bones when animals go through extreme labor in their life, which may be associated with like agriculture or trade, as I mentioned, if they're carrying things or pulling carts or something like that. So that's something that I need to delve further into. So I all I could say is I am going to look into it. So I don't have much more to expand regarding that at the moment.
And An Ong writes, is there any specific reason you use water buffalo rather than only buffalo? At the time, there was more water and people lived surrounded by water. Is that related to why you'd use water buffalo rather than the general term buffalo?
I think to specify in the region, water buffalo seems to be the term used for that animal, and that's the only reason that I'm using it. I don't know if it has to, that I could look, or I do want to look into if it has to do with the fact that they're surrounded by more water, but that's just how I learned to classify that specific animal.
Hmm. Next question. Thank you. Next question from Brandon Rayner is, in any of the contexts, do you see evidence of butchery practices?
Yeah, so generally, when I've looked at, I haven't looked closely to quantify what that may look like for specific animals yet, but it does seem like there are pictures of different animal bones with butchery marks, and that's another thing that I didn't add in future research, but that's something that I want to quantify and see like what animals, what elements, and things like that that have these butchery marks, but there are butchery marks for sure.
Thank you. Thank you. And going to the question from Cholavit Tongcharen Chakit, for those burials associated with cattle remains, uh, do they also indicate social class or social status of the deceased? And are there related grave goods, other related grave goods in those burials?
So that's a really good question. I haven't seen or I haven't looked specifically yet. I've just mainly been looking at the data over time on Excel sheets in a general sense. So I haven't looked to see, and that's the next step, to see if there are specific cattle remains that may be close to certain burials. I don't know how fine-tuned I can get with that, um, given as I mentioned, the burials, a lot of them are mixed up, and it's kind of hard to do that specific of an analysis. But that's something that I'm definitely interested in doing. And if there's a possibility of seeing if it's related to other gray goods, which I don't know if it will be given this assemblage, it would be interesting to think about social status and class. There have been other contemporaneous sites that have done similar studies where the burials aren't as mixed and disturbed, where I believe Pumsnai is one of them, where they've looked at like element distribution in specific graves and seen distinctions based off of certain, I can't remember the top of my head, but they were able to do a more fine-tuned analysis, and I'm not sure if that will be possible with this, but I'm just generally speculating within these general cultural phases, and hopefully if I get radiocarbon dates, I could look at a more fine-tuned analysis and see if there seems to be definitely certain cattle bones that are associated with specific times that may have burials, but I don't know what that will look like just yet. But thank you for that question.
Thank you. There's a question from Masato Iso, which seems to be going beyond the bones. The question is there any material excavated which seems to be used for agricultural labor with cattle or water buffalo?
Not that I'm aware of. So that's another reason I want to see if like the bones at least have some pathology, to see if they were being used for labor, because I don't think there has been any actual like material that may have been tied to that. So I'm using the fauna to just see if for some reason that didn't preserve or whatever may have happened. But thank you for that question.
Thank you. And Cholavit Tongcharan also asked, could it be possible that the deer were hunted down for trade, especially their hides?
I do think that's a possibility. I definitely need to look at the individual fauna specifically to see if they're being skinned and further look into that. But I think that's definitely something that could have been happening with the deer. Thank you.
Thank you. Virendrat Yang from Phnom Penh says, good morning. Could you please explain the way how you date or give the age of the bones you have found in the site?
So I haven't done that specifically yet. One way that I hope to do that in the future is to send bone samples for radiocarbon dating. But the general phases that are on this slide are just based on previous work that's been done already, but I haven't specifically been able to send bone samples in just yet. But radiocarbon dating would be the way that I would eventually, hopefully, get more dates.
Yes, thank you. And yeah, we have something like 10 minutes left in our webinar. A little over 10 minutes, and there are a few questions left, so let's just go through them. Next one is about pigs from anonymous attendee. If pigs were used as part of the ancient rituals, are there any particular ages and sex groups that were preferred from the pigs?
I don't have that data yet, but that's something that I'm looking at for pigs particularly. I haven't looked through enough to be conclusive with that, with my answer for that. But something that I want to look at is mortality profiles for pigs to see when they're being culled, to see if there's a pattern related to that, and see if there are specific age groups that were preferred. And I haven't been able to look at sex groups yet either, but I definitely want to look at the age groups particularly. So I'll hopefully have that answer for you later.
Thank you. So one more pig question. Lee Hayes says, this was fantastic. Are there anything you saw with pig heads or similar faunal materials in contemporary local and diasporic rituals that you expected to see in the archaeology but did not? Is there anything you'd expect to see with the bones that strengthens this connection across time?
That's a very good question. Thank you. I don't think I had anything that I expected to see particularly. Something to note is going into this project, like I mentioned, there's been a lot of research already done for the burials and the humans specifically. Um, Someone's dissertation, 𝐀𝐻𝐭 goes into this more specifically, and that is in my, it should be in my bibliography. So I already knew in terms of expecting to see that there's a lot of pig heads, there's a lot of pigs, but I don't think I really expected to see anything that I see contemporary or that I see now in the past because it's such a long time ago and things change over time. And I don't think there was anything that I went in expecting. But is there anything? The last question is a good question, but I'm not sure at the moment. Aside from the fact that pig heads seem to have continued in having ritual importance, I'm not sure about something I'll have to think about further, I think, if there's anything else that would strengthen this connection across time. But thank you. Definitely food for thought.
Thank you. And back to anonymous attendee, who, by the way, also writes, "Thank you for the talk. Looking forward to reading your publications on your findings." But before that, he asked the question, could you explain further about the use of buffalo remains at Angkor Borei? I noticed in your slide showing metal buffalo horns from Phum Snai. Have you found anything similar at Angkor Borei? Will there be a comparative study between Snai and Angkor Borei regarding buffalo remains?
I would be interested in that. I don't know. There's nothing scheduled so far, but that would be interesting, I think. I don't think there have been any metal buffalo horns found at Angkor Borei as well. But I think it's interesting that a contemporaneous site has that similarity. And it's something that I definitely would like to eventually compare in terms of what was materially found and fauna-wise, what has been found as well. But thank you for the question. That's something I am very interested in.
Thank you, thank you. And anonymous attendee also threw in a short question. Will you share the materials? And I think you have already mentioned that you are available for follow-up questions.
Mhm.
And since we are being recorded today, this recording and conversation and your presentation will be online together with other webinars at the Center for Khmer Studies. So it should be possible to look you up there.
Yes, for sure.
Right. So that's great. And then there was also one more question from Geo Chigas. Is it correct that the presence of animal remains at ritual sites indicates the animals were used as offerings to ancestor spirits or gods? But to my understanding, animals are not used as offerings in Hindu rituals. So would the use as animals be as I think sacrificed animals be
Mhm.
an indigenous practice and not a result of Indic influence?
Yeah, definitely. So, let me this could mean that if these animals are part of this ritual site, it could indicate for sure that they are perhaps some kind of offering. Um, and that's something that regarding your later question, um, I do think that the inclusion of using or sacrificing or using these animals as offerings may be associated with indigenous practices that are persevering alongside as like I mentioned earlier, they're starting to intensively interact with India and having influence from Indic religions and culture, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all parts of that are taking over what's happening locally. So I do think this may be an example of local traditions and indigenous practices continuing alongside outside influences being incorporated over time.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I remember years ago traveling, and I was in Kolkata in West Bengal and visiting the Kali temple, and they were, sacrificing goats big time.
Mm.
So it's not that there's not animal sacrifice going on. This might be rather complicated how to parse
Mhm.
and also across this time and space to the ancient site of Angkor Borei to know how they were using it. So I guess there's a whole lot of questions that you can still be asking.
For
And,
sure.
I definitely agree with the other audience member who said he's looking forward to reading your publications on your findings.
Thank you.
That will be fantastic. We have just maybe 1 or 2 minutes, and then we should wrap up. One thing was that in the poster that we had for today, there are some spectacular bones. I don't know
Mhm.
if you want to say anything about those. Are those from a museum or
Yeah,
do you have them there? Or I have a picture here.
let me pull it up real quick. That was actually so part of the funding I received from CKS when I was visiting allowed me to visit the Angkor Borei Museum. So those are animal bones that were found in Angkor Borei that are within that museum still. So
Mhm.
there's a lot of most likely like the vertebrae that's up front. That is most likely a big bovid, so maybe water buffalo or cattle or something like that. And
Yeah, yeah.
actually, calling back to the elephant question, that may the bone next to it, I believe it might be a tooth that might be elephant. I have to double check, but so there is some, just not a lot.
I was so curious about that.
Yeah.
I was guessing that might possibly be an elephant tooth, and then I kept looking for rhinoceros stuff in there, but
And then the one behind, it's kind of hard to see, but behind the tooth it is most likely a crocodile mandible. So there's crocodiles as well.
oh,
Hmm.
right. Should we try and pull this up to maybe let me see if I can uh I'm not sure that I am able to share here. But anyway, audience members can have a look at that poster image, and you'll
Hmm.
see the bovid vertebrae, backbone, and also the elephant tooth, if that is
Hmm.
what it is,
Yes,
and
it is.
the crocodile jaw.
Mhm.
Uh, that looks very intriguing.
Yeah.
So yes, and we're sort of running out of time. I want to thank the audience for all your perseverance and interest in pursuing all these questions. And I concur with the sentiment that this was a great talk, and we're very grateful,
Thank you.
and we look forward to learning more. So thank you for today. I don't know if you have any additional words that you want to add.
I just would like to end by thanking everyone for coming and for your great questions. And if you have any follow-up questions or would like access to any materials or readings, please feel free to reach out. And of course, thank you, Dr. Fiskesho and CKS and everyone for hosting this. I really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And with that, I think we conclude today's event, and very grateful for this, and hope to see everyone at another webinar or in person somewhere.
Yes,
Thanks.
thank you.
Thank you.